Among the countless creatures catalogued in the annals of adventuring lore, few inspire as much dismissive contempt as the goblin. To the average sellsword or town guard, these diminutive humanoids represent nothing more than a minor irritation vermin to be exterminated with the same casual efficiency one might apply to rats in a grain cellar. This widespread dismissal constitutes one of the most dangerous misconceptions in all of dungeon delving. Kingdoms have fallen through such underestimation. The goblin stands as perhaps the most ubiquitous humanoid species across the multiverse. From the sun-baked wastes of desert kingdoms to the frozen tundras of the north, from the deepest subterranean complexes to the fetid sewers beneath civilized cities, goblins have established their presence. Their adaptability rivals that of humans themselves, and in sheer numbers, they may well surpass every other intelligent race combined. This omnipresence alone should command respect, yet it breeds only familiarity and contempt. Historical records document countless instances where this contempt proved fatal. Fortresses designed to withstand siege by organized armies have fallen to goblin incursion. Entire duchies have watched their outlying villages despoiled and abandoned as goblin warrens expanded unchecked. Subterranean trade routes, once considered secure, have been permanently lost to chattering hordes that transformed miles of worked stone into impenetrable, trap-laden mazes. The pattern repeats across centuries and continents, yet the lesson remains unlearned. The fundamental error lies in conflating physical stature with actual threat. Standing barely 3 feet tall and weighing scarcely more than a human child, the individual goblin presents minimal danger to a trained warrior. This observable fact blinds observers to the greater truth. Goblins do not operate as individuals. They represent a collective organism, a swarming intelligence that compensates for individual weakness through overwhelming numerical superiority and vicious ingenuity. A single goblin may be a nuisance. A dozen constitute a serious threat. A tribe of several hundred becomes a military force capable of strategic operation. Beyond mere numbers, goblins possess capabilities that remain largely unknown outside academic circles. The true depth of goblin society, the sophisticated brutality of their culture, and the terrifying variance that magical exposure has created across the plains, these realities remain hidden behind the dismissive stereotype of the cowardly, incompetent pest. The goblin who flees from fair combat is the same creature who spent the previous night engineering deadfall traps of murderous complexity. The chattering fool who values worthless baubles over genuine treasure operates within a psychological framework entirely alien to larger races, one that makes their behavior unpredictable and therefore dangerous. This exploration seeks to illuminate what centuries of adventuring lore have obscured through repetition and contempt. The complete picture of goblin biology reveals adaptations honed across millennia. Their psychological drives, so often dismissed as simple stupidity or cowardice, stem from environmental pressures that would break most species. The social structures they construct, crude as they appear, demonstrate organizational principles that allow them to thrive in conditions that would destroy more civilized societies. Their contributions to warfare, particularly in trapsmithing and beast mastery, have influenced military tactics across cultures. The aberrant strains produced through magical experimentation and planar exposure represent threats that transcend the common goblin entirely. Understanding these realities transforms the goblin from punchline to genuine threat assessment. The creature that bursts from the darkness with a rusty blade and maniacal grin carries within its bloodline thousands of years of successful adaptation. Behind its seemingly random actions lies a psychology shaped by brutal competition. Within its squalid warren wait innovations in lethality that predate most civilized kingdoms. This is the goblin that exists beyond the stereotype, persistent, adaptable, and far more dangerous than anyone wishes to acknowledge. The physical form of the goblin presents immediate contradictions to even the casual observer. These small humanoids bear a twisted, almost grotesque resemblance to human children, a similarity that makes their actual nature all the more disturbing. Standing between 3 and 3.5 feet in height, with body weights ranging from 40 to 55 pounds, Goblins possess frames that appear simultaneously fragile and bizarrely durable. This paradox extends throughout their entire biology. The diversity of goblin physiognomy defies simple categorization. Within a single tribe, individuals may display wildly different features, though certain characteristics remain universal. The goblin skull structure tends toward flat faces and sloping foreheads, creating a profile that suggests both primitivism and cunning malevolence. Many possess grotesquely exaggerated features, hooked noses that extend nearly to their chins, pointed ears that protrude at absurd angles, bulging eyes that seem ready to pop from their sockets, or oversized fangs that prevent proper closure of their wide mouths. These features, far from being mere aesthetic variations, serve practical purposes. Those exaggerated ears detect sounds that would escape human perception. Those bulging eyes gather maximum light in subterranean darkness. The goblin body plan reveals further adaptations to their lifestyle. Arms that hang nearly to the knees provide exceptional reach for creatures of their stature, allowing them to scramble across rough terrain with disturbing speed. Their frames vary dramatically, even within tribal groupings. Some present wiry, almost skeletal builds, supported by knobby joints and skinny limbs, while others display inexplicably flabby or roly-poly physiques. This variation appears random, but likely represents different adaptations within the tribal ecosystem. The lean goblin scouts and trap makers. The bulkier specimens serve as shock troops or food testers. Skin coloration among goblins spans a range that seems deliberately designed to unsettle observers. Bright greens reminiscent of pond scum, vivid oranges like infected wounds, sallow yellows suggesting jaundice, deep earthy browns, and even dark reds that recall dried blood. All these shades and more appear across goblin populations. Typically, a single tribe shares a general coloration, suggesting that skin tone may serve as a form of tribal identification, or that environmental factors in specific layers produce consistent pigmentation. Some goblins present completely hairless skin with an oily sheen that helps them squeeze through narrow passages. Others sport patchy, mangy fur from brow to back, providing minimal warmth in colder environments. The goblin sensory system shows clear adaptation to subterranean existence. Dark vision, extending 60 feet, allows them to navigate absolute darkness with the same confidence other races display in daylight. This advantage explains their preference for ambush tactics in lightless corridors and their ability to establish warrens in depths where other races require constant artificial illumination. Combined with their selective but intense perceptiveness, this dark vision makes goblins formidable opponents in their chosen environment. Biologically, goblins possess theoretical lifespans comparable to humans, with the potential to live 60 or 70 years under ideal conditions. This fact surprises most scholars, as field observations rarely encounter goblins showing signs of advanced age. The explanation lies not in goblin biology, but in goblin culture and psychology. The violent, competitive nature of their society ensures that most goblins meet early, gruesome ends. Their unbridled, reckless curiosity drives them into situations that more cautious species would avoid. A goblin who survives to middle age has done so through exceptional cunning, brutal dominance, or sheer improbable luck. The goblin approach to hygiene, or rather their complete rejection of it, deserves particular attention. These creatures care absolutely nothing for personal cleanliness. An ever-present nauseating stink accompanies goblin populations, a miasma compounded of unwashed bodies, rotting food, excrement, and substances best left unidentified. Far from viewing this condition as a liability, many goblins take profound pride in their disgusting habits and filthy lairs. The most putrid warrens become sources of tribal prestige. The goblin who can tolerate the worst conditions without complaint gains status among peers. Their attire reflects this philosophy. Goblins favor ramshackle, drab, and thoroughly soiled leather clothing, assembled from whatever materials come to hand. Yet, here appears another contradiction. Despite the crude appearance, goblin equipment proves highly serviceable. An innate knack for tinkering allows them to maintain rusty weapons and patchwork armor in functional condition. A goblin blade may appear ready to shatter, its surface pitted with corrosion and its edge notched from a dozen battles, yet it cuts with surprising efficiency. Goblin armor might consist of pieces scavenged from a dozen different sources, stitched together with gut string and wire, adorned with weird and pointless trinkets, yet it provides protection adequate to its purpose. This juxtaposition of apparent incompetence and actual functionality characterizes goblin craftsmanship, ugly, offensive to aesthetic sensibilities, but undeniably effective. The psychology of the goblin presents perhaps the greatest challenge to understanding, as their mental processes operate along pathways fundamentally alien to larger humanoid races. To comprehend goblin behavior requires abandoning assumptions based on human or even orcish cognition. The goblin mind follows its own logic, shaped by environmental pressures that begin at birth and continue throughout their brief, violent lives. Goblin reproduction establishes the foundation for everything that follows. Goblin mothers give birth to litters numbering around a dozen offspring, sometimes more. From the moment these infants enter the world, they face competition. The maternal goblin possesses neither the resources nor the inclination to nurture each child equally. Food, attention, protection all exist in quantities insufficient to sustain the entire litter. Immediate, fierce competition becomes the only path to survival. The young goblin learns to bite, scratch, steal, and manipulate before it learns to walk properly. Those who fail to compete aggressively enough simply do not survive to adolescence. This brutal upbringing instills psychological patterns that persist throughout the goblin lifespan. An impulsive, selfish curiosity becomes the primary driver of behavior. Goblins develop into creatures that constantly poke, prod, whine, and vandalize their surroundings simply to provoke reactions from others. This behavior, so often dismissed as mindless destructiveness or simple stupidity, actually represents a sophisticated survival strategy. The goblin who attracts attention, positive or negative, establishes their presence within the social hierarchy. The goblin who goes unnoticed risks being forgotten, overlooked when resources are distributed, excluded from raiding parties, vulnerable to predation by their own tribe members. Scholars who study goblin behavior have developed a controversial theory regarding their larger military actions. The countless raids and wars initiated by goblin tribes against neighboring settlements may represent macro expressions of this fundamental psychological need for attention. A goblin tribe living in isolation, ignored by the wider world, experiences collective psychological distress. Attacking a human village forces the world to acknowledge their existence. The defenders who mobilize, the adventurers who arrive seeking to exterminate the threat, the news that spreads to nearby kingdoms, all of this represents attention on a scale that satisfies something deep within the goblin psyche. The raid itself may matter less than the reaction it provokes. This attention-seeking drive combines with an insatiable craving for novelty. Goblins bore easily and completely. A leader who commanded fierce loyalty yesterday may find themselves abandoned or assassinated today, simply because the tribe has grown tired of their presence. Codes of conduct, when they exist at all in goblin society, last only until something more interesting comes along. Even treasures lose their appeal rapidly. A goblin will risk life and limb to acquire some specific bauble, fight viciously to retain possession of it, then discard it days later in favor of a new obsession. This constant need for new experiences and sensations makes goblin behavior highly unpredictable and prevents them from forming the stable, long-term plans that characterize more organized societies. The goblin value system reflects their overpopulated, resource-scarce environment. Quantity trumps quality in virtually every decision. Presented with a choice between one magnificent, priceless artifact and a handful of shiny but worthless baubles, the goblin chooses the baubles without hesitation. This preference stems from practical origins in a crowded warren where theft and violence occur constantly. A single valuable item represents a target that invites aggression. A collection of minor trinkets distributes risk and provides multiple sources of satisfaction. The goblin with 100 worthless objects possesses more to play with, more to trade, more to lose without suffering total deprivation. Despite their chaotic nature and apparent stupidity, goblins demonstrate considerable intelligence in specific domains. They are consummate, devious schemers who concoct highly complex plans to acquire desired objects or achieve specific goals. The fact that these plans often appear illogical to outside observers reflects differences in priorities and risk assessment rather than genuine incompetence. A goblin scheme that triggers cascading calamities may still achieve its original objective. The collateral damage simply does not register as a problem in the goblin assessment. The village that burns, the innocent casualties, the long-term consequences, none of these factors weigh against the immediate satisfaction of success. Goblin perception operates on principles that baffle other races. Their perceptiveness is highly selective, focusing intensely on certain categories of stimuli while completely ignoring others. A goblin may walk directly past a massive, obvious threat, a lurking monster, a conspicuous trap, a clearly dangerous structural weakness without displaying the slightest awareness. Yet, this same goblin will immediately notice a piece of weird graffiti hidden in shadows, a scrap of ruined parchment wedged in a crack, or a rotten piece of food concealed beneath debris. This selective attention appears random, but likely reflects evolved priorities. Goblins notice what matters to goblin: survival, territorial markers, potential food sources, signs of other goblins' presence, while filtering out information irrelevant to their immediate needs. Goblin society, for all its apparent chaos and squalor, operates according to consistent principles that have allowed the species to thrive across diverse environments. Understanding these organizational structures reveals how such seemingly disorganized creatures accomplish coordinated actions and maintain tribal cohesion despite their psychological volatility. The goblin talent for adaptation manifests most clearly in their choice of habitats. Capable of surviving in any climate or altitude, from Arctic wastes to tropical jungles, from sea level to mountain peaks, goblins have established populations in virtually every terrestrial environment. Yet despite this flexibility, they display clear preferences. Subterranean quarters attract goblins with particular intensity. Caves, dungeons, abandoned mines, underground ruins, these dark, enclosed spaces satisfy something fundamental in the goblin psyche. The darkness that repels surface-dwelling races provides comfort and security to goblin populations. The establishment of a goblin warren follows predictable patterns. Only the smartest goblins possess the engineering knowledge necessary to excavate and construct new lairs from raw terrain. Most tribes, therefore, act as militant squatters, seeking existing structures to claim through force. An abandoned dungeon represents an ideal target. Pre-existing chambers and corridors require minimal modification, and the previous inhabitants often left behind useful debris. Natural cave systems offer similar advantages. In regions of dense human settlement, goblins have even colonized urban sewers, transforming the waste channels beneath cities into sprawling warrens that honeycomb the foundations of civilization itself. The process of claiming and transforming a lair demonstrates goblin organizational capacity. The initial assault drives out or exterminates current residents. Speed matters here. Goblins excel at overwhelming resistance through numerical superiority and reckless aggression. Once the space is secured, the tribe moves in en masse, and transformation begins. Within days, the captured location becomes unrecognizable. What was once an orderly complex devolves into a warren, a cluttered, stinking, labyrinthine mess of junk and chattering bodies. Garbage accumulates in drifts. Crude graffiti covers every available surface. The original architecture disappears beneath goblin modifications. New passages carved through walls, existing doors blocked or trapped, chambers subdivided or combined according to incomprehensible logic. Goblin warrens announce themselves to the world through unmistakable signs. Trails of garbage radiate from entrances, marking goblin territory more effectively than any posted warning. The graffiti that surrounds access points serves multiple functions: territorial markers, crude maps for tribe members, warnings to outsiders, or simply the product of bored goblins with pigment and time. Inside these dark holes, the concept of privacy does not exist. Goblins live in constant, crowded proximity, their entire existence playing out in full view of dozens or hundreds of tribe members. This enforced communal living intensifies their psychological need for attention while simultaneously making genuine privacy impossible to achieve. The governmental structure of goblin tribes reflects brutal simplicity. Described accurately as violent autocracy, goblin society operates under the rule of the strong. The biggest, strongest, or occasionally the smartest, goblin rules the tribe through intimidation and demonstrated capacity for violence. This system contains no formal succession planning, no hereditary rights, no electoral process. When a goblin ruler dies through assassination, combat, accident, or the rare natural causes, the individual responsible for that death automatically assumes leadership. This creates a social dynamic where ambitious goblins constantly evaluate whether they can successfully kill their current leader, while leaders must maintain sufficient strength and paranoia to prevent such attempts. Despite its apparent instability, this system provides certain advantages. Leadership positions go to goblins demonstrably capable of violence and cunning. Weak or incompetent rulers find themselves quickly replaced, preventing the ossification that can plague hereditary systems. The constant threat of usurpation keeps leaders vicious and alert. However, it also prevents long-term planning and creates incentives for rulers to eliminate any subordinate showing excessive competence. Economic survival for goblin tribes depends primarily on raiding and theft. Goblins produce relatively little through their own labor, instead acquiring resources by stealing from neighbors. Nighttime raids on outlying farms and villages provide livestock, food, weapons, clothing, and miscellaneous goods. Goblins demonstrate particular skill at stealth approach and rapid withdrawal, materializing from darkness to snatch valuable items before defenders can organize response. Travelers on isolated roads face similar predation, losing not just valuables but potentially the clothes from their backs to opportunistic goblin ambushers. Slavery plays a significant role in goblin economics. Tribes frequently capture members of other races, forcing these slaves to perform the hard manual labor of expanding and maintaining warren infrastructure. A goblin's physical size and strength limits their capacity for mining, construction, or heavy transport. Enslaved humans, dwarves, or other sturdier species provide the muscle necessary for major projects. The treatment of these slaves varies by tribe and circumstance, but rarely approaches humane. Most slaves survive only until they collapse from exhaustion or disease, at which point they are discarded or consumed. In some regions, goblins have achieved an uneasy integration into civilized society. Highly tolerant or thoroughly corrupt human cities may permit the formation of what are euphemistically termed goblinoid ghettos. These squalid districts house goblin populations who eke out marginal existences at the very bottom of urban hierarchies. They take the most dangerous and filthy jobs that no other city resident will accept: clearing sewers, disposing of toxic waste, working in conditions that would kill humans within weeks. Some find employment with crime syndicates, serving as cheap thieves whose small size allows access to secured locations, or as assassins whose disposability makes them perfect for high-risk attacks. The city authorities tolerate these ghettos with varying degrees of enforcement, recognizing that goblin labor provides economic value while also creating controllable concentrations of a potentially dangerous population. The goblin approach to warfare reveals complexities that contradict their reputation for simple-minded cowardice. While individual combat behavior often confirms the stereotype of the craven pest who flees at the first sign of genuine danger, the larger picture shows sophisticated understanding of tactics, terrain advantage, and force multiplication through both mechanical and biological means. The goblin legacy as the first trapsmiths stands as one of their most significant contributions to martial history. According to ancient lore masters whose records predate most civilized kingdoms, goblin tribes were the original innovators in sophisticated trap design. Long before other humanoid races developed comparable techniques, goblins engineered ingenious snares, pits, and deadfalls for hunting large game. This innovation arose from necessity. A 3-foot-tall humanoid with minimal strength cannot bring down a deer or boar through direct confrontation. Traps allowed goblins to kill prey many times their size, providing massive amounts of food and enabling survival through harsh winters when other small species starved. This ancestral legacy survives in modern goblin culture through the specialized role of the trapmaker. While all goblins possess basic facility with simple snares, true trapmakers elevate the craft to art form. These specialists view the creation of deadly mechanisms not as mere practical necessity, but as creative expression. A trapmaker's reputation within the tribe rests on the ingenuity, lethality, and sheer viciousness of their creations. The spike-filled pit that merely kills receives minimal respect. The spike-filled pit that also delivers poison triggers secondary collapses and creates maximum suffering before death. This earns acclaim. Goblin traps range from crude but effective designs, replicable by any tribe member, to mechanisms of fearsome complexity requiring specialized knowledge. Simple examples include concealed pits, tripwires attached to falling objects, and snares designed to immobilize or strangle. Advanced trapmaker creations incorporate multiple triggering mechanisms, redundant systems that activate if the primary trap is detected and disarmed, and cascading effects where one trap's activation sets off chains of additional hazards. Some goblin trapsmiths achieve such sophistication that their warrens become virtually impregnable to conventional assault, every corridor and chamber transformed into a gauntlet of lethal ingenuity. Direct combat reveals the goblin's complex relationship with cowardice and courage. As individuals or small groups, goblins have poor grasp of honor and will immediately flee if battle turns against them. This behavior stems from rational assessment rather than moral. Failing a 3-foot-tall creature with minimal armor and a rusty blade recognizes, correctly, that staying to fight a losing battle against larger, better-equipped opponents means certain death. Goblins value survival over glory. When routes of escape exist, they take them without shame or hesitation. However, this apparent cowardice disappears when goblins possess overwhelming advantage. Given superior numbers, favorable terrain, or the element of surprise, goblins display vicious aggression. Their preferred tactics maximize these advantages: ambushes from concealment, coordinated volleys of arrows or javelins from positions that prevent retaliation, rapid hit-and-run strikes that inflict casualties before melting back into darkness. The narrow passages of their warrens allow them to employ 5-foot step tactics, popping into sight just long enough to launch ranged attacks before ducking back into cover. Adventurers who pursue fleeing goblins into their home territory often discover too late that the retreat was calculated bait, drawing enemies into kill zones where every corner conceals archers and every floor tile might trigger catastrophic traps. The classic goblin battle cry, "Bree-yark," deserves particular attention. To uninitiated ears, this chattering shriek sounds like meaningless noise. Experienced delvers know better. Bree-yark translates approximately to "more goblins are on the way," and serves as both warning and psychological weapon. The cry announces that reinforcements approach, that the current skirmish represents merely the vanguard of larger forces. Whether this claim is truthful or bluff matters less than its effect. Enemies must suddenly calculate whether to press their current advantage or withdraw before becoming outnumbered. This moment of hesitation often proves decisive. Goblin behavior under military discipline presents startling contrast to their usual chaos. When forced to march as organized armies under the command of bugbear or hobgoblin officers, goblins demonstrate surprising capability for order. The same creatures who cannot maintain basic cleanliness or consistent loyalty to their own chiefs will march in formation, hold ranks under fire, and advance or retreat on command when larger goblinoids enforce discipline through credible threat of immediate execution for disobedience. This transformation reveals that goblin chaos stems more from cultural factors than inherent incapacity. Given sufficient motivation, which is to say, sufficient terror, they can function as soldiers comparable to or even exceeding orcish infantry in reliability. The goblin affinity for beasts represents their most remarkable martial innovation. While larger goblinoid cousins like hobgoblins simply beat animals into submission through superior strength, goblins lack this option. Instead, they bond with creatures, treating them as beloved companions rather than mere tools. This relationship goes beyond simple utility. Goblins form genuine emotional attachments to their beast partners. When a goblin's mount or pet dies, the master experiences authentic grief, sometimes even abandoning combat or refusing food in mourning. Wolf and Werg cavalry constitute the most familiar application of this bond. Goblins riding snarling wolves create fast, mobile units capable of harassing enemy flanks, picking off isolated soldiers, and conducting rapid raids deep into hostile territory. The wolves provide speed and killing power that individual goblins lack, while goblin riders contribute ranged attacks and tactical direction. The partnership produces a whole, greater than the sum of its parts. Some tribes favor Werg's larger, more intelligent versions of wolves, creating elite cavalry units that combine animal ferocity with near-human cunning. In isolated wilderness regions, goblin beast mastery extends to exotic species. Tribes have successfully tamed and ridden giant hornets, creating aerial units capable of devastating dive attacks. Others employ pony-sized dire rats as mounts, trading the speed of wolves for the rats' ability to squeeze through narrow passages and their fearlessness in absolute darkness. Beyond mounts, goblins utilize diverse creatures in supporting roles. Carrion crawlers serve as vanguard fighters whose paralytic tentacles disable enemies for goblin follow-up attacks. Bats function as scouts and early warning systems, their agitation alerting the tribe to approaching threats. Venomous snakes become living traps, hidden in locations where intruders will trigger strikes from multiple angles. This menagerie approach to warfare creates unpredictable tactical situations. Adventurers who prepare to face goblin archers and blade-wielding infantry find themselves suddenly contending with aerial bombardment from hornet-mounted riders, ambush by carrion crawlers emerging from side passages, or coordinated snake strikes from concealed positions. The variety prevents standardized response and forces enemies to maintain constant vigilance against threats from unexpected vectors. The spiritual life of goblins reflects the same chaotic creativity that characterizes every aspect of their existence. While religious practices exist across goblin populations, their expression varies wildly between tribes and demonstrates the species' tendency to absorb, distort, and repurpose the cultural elements they encounter. The vast majority of goblins worship Maglubiet, the evil deity of goblinoids who holds dominion over goblin, hobgoblin, and bugbear populations across the multiverse. Maglubiet demands specific behaviors from his followers, expand their numbers through prolific reproduction, overwhelm their competitors through numerical superiority, and crush their enemies through relentless aggression. These commandments align naturally with goblin psychology and social structure, requiring minimal deviation from behaviors goblins would pursue regardless of divine instruction. A goblin honoring Maglubiet through raid and warfare experiences no conflict between religious obligation and personal inclination. However, goblin cognition proves too unorthodox and chaotic for monolithic religious conformity. Many tribes invent their own arbitrary myths and rituals, creating variations on Maglubiet worship that would be unrecognizable to orthodox practitioners. These modifications range from minor alterations in ceremonial practice to wholesale invention of additional deities, spirits, and supernatural forces. Goblin shamans, operating with minimal theological training and maximal creative license, develop unique interpretations based on visions, accidents, or simple whim. A shaman who experiences a vivid dream might declare new dietary restrictions. Another who survives a near-death experience might institute novel sacrifice requirements. These innovations spread or vanish based purely on the tribe's enthusiasm, with no consideration for doctrinal consistency or historical precedent. The goblin tendency to imitate neighboring cultures produces particularly strange results in religious practice. Goblins frequently observe the customs and rituals of nearby civilized societies, then incorporate warped versions into their own traditions. A goblin tribe living near a human settlement might witness harvest festivals and decide to institute their own celebration, completely misunderstanding the original purpose and creating something simultaneously familiar and grotesque. The prayers might sound similar in cadence, The ceremonial actions might mirror the human original, but the underlying meaning has been transformed into something that serves goblin priorities and reflects goblin values. What began as thanksgiving for agricultural bounty becomes celebration of successful raids. What started as solemn religious observance becomes raucous party focused on the consumption of stolen goods. In deep wilderness regions, far from civilized influence, isolated goblin tribes sometimes develop stranger spiritual practices. These remote populations may hear the call of primal nature spirits, powerful entities tied to specific locations or natural phenomena. However, goblin perception and psychology color even these encounters. Where other races might perceive majestic spirits of the forest, noble totems of animal power, or awesome manifestations of elemental force, goblins encounter something different. Their twisted minds envision these spirits as unpleasant entities, projecting their own aesthetic preferences and psychological patterns onto the supernatural. Thus arise goblin totems with names like Skanoog the Skunk or Blorg the Whelk, spirits of filth, decay, and processes that other races find revolting. These unpleasant totems suit goblin sensibilities perfectly. A spirit of rot and decomposition speaks to creatures who take pride in their own filth. A totem associated with scavenging and carrion consumption aligns with goblin dietary practices and waste disposal methods. The goblin shaman who channels Skanoog the Skunk gains powers related to noxious odors, disease transmission, and the ability to thrive in conditions of extreme squalor gifts that other races would reject with horror but that goblins embrace enthusiastically. Goblin religious ceremonies themselves reflect their chaotic nature. Lacking the patience for extended meditation, the discipline for complex rituals, or the sobriety for dignified observance, goblins conduct spiritual practices that outsiders might mistake for drunken revelry or mass brawls. Ceremonial gatherings devolve rapidly into shoving matches, competitive displays, and consumption of whatever intoxicants or questionable foods are available. The shaman attempting to conduct formal rites must shout over constant chatter, break up fights, and prevent the congregation from wandering away in boredom. Yet within this apparent chaos, genuine spiritual elements persist. Prayers are uttered, offerings are made, and connections to divine or primal powers are established, all amid the disorder that goblins consider normal social interaction. The standard goblin, dangerous as it proves in sufficient numbers, represents merely the baseline of the species. Magical experimentation, planar exposure, and spontaneous mutation have produced variants that transcend the common goblin's capabilities, creating threats that approach or exceed the danger posed by far larger creatures. The blues stand as perhaps the most mysterious goblin variant, emerging not through external influence, but as spontaneous psionic mutations born directly into normal goblin tribes. These rare individuals are immediately identifiable by their distinctly blue-tinged skin, a coloration that sets them apart from their green, yellow, or brown siblings. Beyond pigmentation, blues display unsloped foreheads and bright, intelligent eyes that lack the feral, unfocused quality typical of common goblins. These physical differences signal profound cognitive divergence. From birth, blues possess mental capabilities that terrify standard goblins. Innate psionic powers manifest early, with infant blues demonstrating abilities like minor telekinesis or emotional projection before they can properly walk. This difference triggers immediate, violent responses in typical goblin populations. The standard goblin psychology, shaped by brutal competition and distrust of anything unusual, identifies blues as threats. Many tribes kill these aberrant births immediately, crushing the infants or exposing them to environmental hazards. This infanticide stems from genuine fear. Goblins understand instinctively that a creature capable of affecting minds poses existential danger to the social order based on physical intimidation. However, some goblin tribes, whether through enlightened self-interest or accidental preservation, allow blues to survive. These individuals grow into powerful scions whose abilities dramatically enhance tribal capabilities. A mature blue can employ Charm Person to manipulate enemies or neutral parties, turning potential opponents into temporary allies. Finger of Fire provides ranged attack capability exceeding anything a standard goblin archer can deliver. More subtle applications include telepathic communication for coordinated ambushes, emotional manipulation to intensify goblin rage before battle, or mental detection of approaching enemies. Blues typically lead goblin task forces from rear positions, their physical fragility protected while their mental powers support and enhance conventional goblin tactics. Dark goblins represent a separate evolutionary branch, native to the plane of shadow rather than the material plane. These creatures exist as shadowy reflections of their material counterparts, adapted to the bleak landscape of eternal twilight. Physically, dark goblins appear slightly lighter than normal goblins, weighing around 30 pounds, their frames more ethereal than the already slight common goblin build. Their skin displays sickly red or pale yellow coloration, hues that seem washed out and faded, as though the very pigment has been drained by constant shadow exposure. Most disturbing are their eyes' washed-out red orbs that gleam with malevolent intelligence and reflect light like those of nocturnal predators. Dark goblins favor clothing of gray leather, garments that blend seamlessly with the perpetual gloom of their native plane. This natural camouflage combines with supernatural stealth abilities, allowing dark goblins to achieve near invisibility in shadowed conditions. They move through darkness not just undetected, but virtually impossible to perceive, even by creatures with dark vision. This makes them exceptional assassins and infiltrators, capable of crossing from the plane of shadow into the material world to conduct raids that seem to materialize from nowhere and vanish just as impossibly. The psychology of dark goblins differs notably from their material cousins. Extended existence in the plane of shadow, where colors are muted and emotions seem dampened by the pervasive gloom, has produced creatures more calculating and patient than typical goblins. They lack the manic energy and constant need for stimulation that drives material goblins. Instead, dark goblins demonstrate capacity for long-term planning and delayed gratification. They plot elaborate schemes over months or years, working with steady patience to bring light dwellers to ruin. Their ultimate goals often center on expanding the influence of shadow into the material world, spreading the gloom they consider natural and comfortable into realms they perceive as offensively bright and vibrant. The Iorach mutants represent deliberate, if horrifically flawed, attempts to enhance goblin physical capabilities through alchemical means. The tribe's name translates to bloody eye lying on the ground, a phrase that suggests both violence and disturbing imagery. Their chief, Kezarug, sought to address what he perceived as the fundamental weakness of goblin warriors' inadequate size and strength. Unable to accept the species' natural limitations, he pursued enhancement through magical experimentation. The process Kezarug developed centered on massive alchemical pits filled with esoteric mixtures whose exact composition remains mercifully unknown to outside scholars. Reports mention human blood and brains among the ingredients, suggesting necromantic or profane elements. The methodology involved lowering goblin warriors into these boiling brews, subjecting them to extended immersion while the alchemical compounds worked their transformations. The mortality rate was catastrophic. Most subjects dissolved, drowned, or expired from the sheer trauma of the process. The survivors, however, achieved Kezarug's goal in the most literal and terrible sense. They grew to medium size, matching, or exceeding human stature. Their physical strength increased proportionally, granting them combat capabilities far beyond normal goblin limits, but the cost was grotesque. The alchemical transformation mutated them into misshapen horrors, twisted limbs that bent at unnatural angles, bulbous eyes that protruded dangerously from malformed skulls, festering sores that wept constant discharge. The mutations appeared random and varied between individuals, as though the alchemical process attacked each subject's biology along different vectors. These Iorach mutants function as shock troops, their enhanced size and strength deployed in direct combat roles impossible for standard goblins. Their horrific appearance provides psychological advantage, as enemies hesitate or recoil from creatures so visibly wrong. However, the mutations come with significant drawbacks. Many IORH suffer constant pain from their malformed bodies. Their extended limbs lack proper coordination, their oversized organs create internal pressure and dysfunction, and their festering sores never properly heal. Life expectancy for mutants remains low, even by goblin standards, their bodies slowly breaking down under the strain of their own wrongness. The goblins of Ravenloft represent the darkest manifestation of goblin transformation, creatures born not from natural variation or alchemical experimentation, but from powerful curses that strip away the victim's original identity entirely. These tragic horrors inhabit the domain of dread, known as Forlorn, a realm where mist and malevolence combine to produce suffering on scales that transcend mere physical torment. The critical distinction of goblins is their origin. They were not born as goblins, but transformed from normal humanoids through evil magic. This curse strips away everything that defined the victim's previous existence. Memories fade to fragments. Personality dissolves. Physical form restructures into something monstrous. The transformation is complete and irreversible, producing creatures that retain no functional connection to their previous lives. Physically, goblins display greenish-brown, warty skin that seems perpetually diseased. Hair falls from the top of the skull, leaving only a wild, shaggy mane around the base of the head that gives the appearance of partial scalping. The face becomes a nightmare of predatory features. The fanged mouth can expand to consume half the creature's entire head, unhinging like a serpent's jaw to deliver devastating bites. The eyes lose all pupils and irises, becoming orbs that glow like red-hot embers, windows into a mind consumed entirely by hunger and malice. Goblins exist in complete subservience to their creators, typically powerful necromancers or dark lords who employ the transformation as punishment or for creating disposable soldiers. A telepathic link connects each goblin to its master, allowing for perfect coordination and instant command transmission. This hive mind structure makes goblin packs terrifyingly effective in combat. They attack in perfect synchronization, exploit openings with machine precision, and execute complex tactics without need for verbal communication. The function of goblins is singular and horrifying. They exist only to feast on the flesh of the living and obey their creator's commands. The hunger that drives them operates beyond normal appetite, representing instead a magical compulsion that can never be satisfied. A goblin can consume its own body weight in flesh and still experience the same ravenous emptiness. This ensures they remain perpetually motivated to hunt and kill, perfect servants for masters who wish to terrorize or eliminate populations. The tragedy of goblins lies in what remains of their original consciousness. Deep within the transformed mind, fragments of the original person sometimes persist, fleeting memories of loved ones, momentary recognition of places from their previous life, or brief flashes of horror at what they have become. These moments of clarity are brief and inevitably crushed beneath the weight of the curse, the goblin compulsions reasserting control. Yet their existence means that some goblins retain enough awareness to understand they are trapped in their own bodies, forced to commit atrocities while fragments of their former selves scream helplessly in the darkness of their own transformed minds. The comprehensive examination of goblin biology, psychology, society, military capability, religion, and aberrant variants reveals a species far more complex and threatening than popular perception acknowledges. The dismissive contempt directed at goblins by adventurers and military strategists alike stems from focusing on individual weaknesses while ignoring collective strengths and the true scope of goblin adaptation across environments, circumstances. The physical form of the goblin, small, seemingly fragile, often comical in appearance, masks adaptations honed across thousands of years. Dark vision, selective perception, extreme physiological diversity within tribes, and an innate facility for makeshift engineering create a baseline creature capable of thriving in conditions that would destroy more advanced species. The goblin's theoretical lifespan matching that of humans suggests biological sophistication that their squalid lifestyle obscures. That most die young reflects cultural factors rather than inherent frailty. Goblin psychology, so often dismissed as simple stupidity or cowardice, operates according to internal logic shaped by environmental pressures few other races experience. Competition beginning at birth, with infant mortality determining survival, creates minds driven by desperate need for attention and novelty. This produces behavior that appears chaotic to observers but serves clear functions within goblin social dynamics. The constant raiding, the obsessive acquisition of worthless trinkets, the rapid cycling through leaders and loyalties, all these patterns make sense when understood as adaptations to extreme population density and resource scarcity. The social structures goblins construct demonstrate organizational capacity that contradicts their reputation for chaos. The brutal meritocracy of rule by the strong provides stable leadership while preventing ossification. The ability to transform any captured location into functional warren in days shows coordinated action and shared purpose. The integration of goblins into urban environments, however degraded their role, proves they can adapt even to civilized society when survival requires it. Goblin contributions to warfare deserve recognition despite their source. The development of sophisticated trapsmithing predating most civilized kingdoms stands as genuine innovation. Modern adventurers who navigate deadly dungeon complexes often face mechanisms descended from ancient goblin hunting traps. The tactical flexibility goblins demonstrate cowardly in disadvantageous situations. Viciously aggressive when conditions favor them represents rational adaptation rather than moral failing. Their ability to function as disciplined soldiers under proper command reveals potential beyond their usual chaotic employment. The goblin affinity for beasts creates force multiplication that transcends their physical limitations. A goblin on foot presents minimal threat. A goblin mounted on a wurg, supported by carrion crawler, vanguard, and venomous snake ambushers, commands tactical respect. This biological approach to warfare, treating animals as genuine partners rather than mere tools, demonstrates emotional and cognitive sophistication that contradicts the image of goblins as mindless pests. Religious and spiritual practices among goblins show their tendency to absorb and transform cultural elements from neighboring societies. The capacity to perceive and interact with primal spirits, even if goblin psychology colors these interactions toward the unpleasant and grotesque, indicates spiritual awareness. The invention of novel myths and arbitrary rituals reflects creative impulse, however chaotic its expression. The aberrant variants produced through mutation, planar exposure, and magical experimentation reveal the true scope of goblin potential. Blues demonstrate that goblin biology can support psionic capabilities rivaling trained mentalists. Dark goblins prove successful adaptation to entirely different planes of existence while maintaining essential goblin characteristics. The Iorak mutants, for all their tragic deformity, achieved the enhancement their creators sought. Goblins, though their existence is horror piled upon horror, function with terrifying efficiency as coordinated predators. These variants also illustrate how readily goblins serve as experimental subjects for darker powers. Their abundance and rapid reproduction make them convenient test subjects. Their resilience allows survival of processes that would kill most other species. The tragedy of goblin variants often lies not in the goblins themselves, but in what they reveal about the forces that created them. Necromancers willing to strip away identity to create disposable soldiers, alchemists pursuing power through horrific experimentation, planar influences that warp entire populations. The fundamental error in dismissing goblins as mere nuisance stems from evaluating them according to standards that privilege individual prowess over collective capability. A single goblin measures poorly against a trained warrior. A tribe of 300 goblins, entrenched in a trapped warren they know intimately, supported by beast allies and possibly enhanced by blue scions or other variants, commanded by a leader smart enough to have survived to achieve authority. This represents a military force requiring serious tactical consideration. History records countless examples of goblin threats dismissed until they grew into genuine crises. Fortresses fallen, trade routes closed, entire regions depopulated and transformed into goblin-controlled badlands. These outcomes follow predictable patterns. Initial encounters with small goblin groups create impression of minimal threat. Authorities respond with insufficient force or ignore the problem entirely. Goblin population expands rapidly through their prolific reproduction. The warren grows, incorporating more territory and more sophisticated defenses. Raids increase in frequency and boldness. By the time authorities recognize the scale of the threat, suppression requires military operations far exceeding what preventive action would have cost. The goblins' role in the ecosystem of dangerous creatures occupies a unique niche. They are simultaneously threat and resource, enemy and opportunity. For beginning adventurers, goblin warrens provide relatively safe opportunities to develop combat skills and tactics. The treasure goblins accumulate, however worthless most of it may be, sometimes includes genuinely valuable items stolen from previous victims. The experience gained clearing goblin infestations prepares adventurers for more dangerous challenges. Yet this training ground perception creates complacency. The adventuring party that clears a dozen goblin warrens without serious difficulty approaches the 13th with dangerous confidence. They fail to recognize that this warren is different, larger, better organized, commanded by an unusually intelligent chief, or inhabited by variant goblins whose capabilities exceed standard parameters. The resulting casualties serve as brutal reminder that underestimation remains the goblin's greatest weapon. Looking forward, goblins will certainly persist as a permanent fixture of the multiverse. Their adaptability ensures survival regardless of changing conditions. Their reproductive capacity allows recovery from catastrophic population losses within generations. Their talent for opportunistic exploitation of any environment or situation means they will find niches in any ecosystem. Climate change, planar shifts, magical catastrophes, goblins will survive and adapt, emerging from the chaos to establish new warrens and resume their eternal cycle of raiding and expansion. The chattering horde represents more than simple monsters to be exterminated. They embody principles of adaptation, survival, and persistence that transcend moral categories. Goblins exist as they are because that existence succeeds. They reproduce, they spread, they survive. From an evolutionary perspective, they are among the most successful humanoid species in existence. That their success comes at the cost of suffering inflicted on neighboring populations is, to the goblin, entirely irrelevant. Understanding goblins requires acknowledging these realities. They are not failed humans or defective beings requiring correction. They are goblins, operating according to goblin logic, pursuing goblin goals through goblin means. The disgust their habits provoke, the frustration their behavior creates, the contempt their appearance inspires, these reactions reflect the observer's perspective, not objective assessment of goblin nature. To the goblin, living in filth makes perfect sense. To the goblin, fleeing hopeless battles demonstrates wisdom. To the goblin, stealing rather than producing represents efficient resource acquisition. The rusty blade wielded by the goblin who bursts from darkness represents thousands of years of successful adaptation. The chattering war cry announces a species that has claimed territory across plains and continents. The seemingly worthless trinkets hoarded in filthy warrens symbolize values and priorities that function perfectly within goblin society. The trap that springs from the corridor floor embodies innovation predating most civilized kingdoms. The beast that charges beside its goblin rider demonstrates partnership across species boundaries. Whether encountered as a scouting pair that flees at first contact, a raiding party of 24 seeking easy plunder, a fortified warren defending tribal territory, or an army marching under hobgoblin command, goblins demand recognition as genuine threats. Their appearance deceives, their behavior confuses. Their success, measured across centuries and continents, speaks for itself. The chattering horde persists, adapts, and ultimately survives, validating through continued existence that what they are and how they function serves their purposes perfectly. This is the goblin that exists beyond stereotype, persistent, adaptable, successful, and far more dangerous than anyone wishes to acknowledge.